Good morning, everyone. Happy Saturday, and hope you enjoyed this little episode that I got here today. I am recording it a little bit early as we're having a bit of a busy weekend today, or this Saturday and Sunday, as we rented a water park area for my daughter for her birthday. And so we're kind of in preparation of getting all that done today, and then also be celebrating a bit with family on Sunday. So just a busy weekend with all that going on there. So that's why I'm recording this a little early. It is a bit overcasted today and we're expecting some rain. So hopefully that won't hinder our plans too much. Sounds like we can still move the party inside. They have like an inside pool area apparently. So either way, I'm sure it'll be fun for her. But yeah, wanted to do this podcast here. And so we're starting off again with our little roulette of gaming here. And actually, before I start that, so I'm going to back up a little bit and then go over from the last three games that I did on this from last week. And so it was Street Fighter 2, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and Pandemonium 2. I had a look at Yakuza Like a Dragon, and it wasn't on sale, and it's not on Game Pass anymore. And it's not expensive. It was like for $20, but I'm like, I don't want to really spend the money on that. So didn't get to play that. But it is on my list, so I wish listed it, so it's on there for me to try it at some point. But I did get to check out Pandemonium 2, and it's so I'm already familiar with the part 1, and it's pretty much more of the same. The graphics, or the character designs anyways, it look a little bit more realistic, and I felt it was a little odd because the game it's a platformer, and a big part of the game is where you're jumping on the enemies' heads. And it feels a little weird when you're doing that when a character's kind of more realistically proportioned, as opposed to just like your very cartoony, like Mario-like character. So that felt a bit weird, but it's still good. I mean, it still plays pretty good. It's the controls are a little stiff, the way the character moves and all, but it's still pretty fun. And the graphics are still pretty good for back then as well, too. So I had some fun with it. It's a bit challenging, so I didn't get too far, but I have my little save game on there where I'll pick up and play, and probably play periodically and all, and hopefully beat it at some point. But yeah, it's a fun little platformer, and I just always like the different angles that you get when you're playing one of these 2.5D platformers. Like I think it was on one of the main first areas that you're playing, where you're kind of like in a town, and it has all these like banners and all that you can sort of jump on, and the way the camera angle kind of shows you, gives you like a sense of scale, right, and all of where you're at. And I thought that was pretty impressive, for even to this day and all. So yeah, it's a fun little platformer. Kind of the story again, it's a little intro at the beginning. The CG is actually pretty decently done, in the intro, but otherwise the story is kind of nonsensical, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. But it still seems fun, like a cool little platformer, but it does seem a little bit challenging. But yeah, so I would say if you're into old school platformers like that, give it a chance. Although really, I mean, the only way I can think of playing that game nowadays is just through emulation. But let's go ahead and do this little round of roulette of gaming here. So let's see. Got my little list here, and I added a few games on there, so I'm up to 1,258 now. All right, so the first one up is 528. Let's see. Oh, okay. Kingdom Under Fire Heroes. All right. All right, let's go another round. 357. Okay, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Okay. And one more. 216. And that's going to be... Oh, no. Oh, no, it's Dark Souls. Oh, my gosh. Okay. So interesting selection here. So, okay. So here's 3 games that I'm not the most knowledgeable on, so I'll just go over what I know here. So for Kingdom Under Fire Heroes, now this one I'm not too familiar with, but I think this is a sequel of some sort to Kingdom Under Fire Crusaders, because I think Kingdom Under Fire Crusaders came out before this one, because that's the one that I'm familiar with, and it's actually that one is actually a really cool game, and I love the concept to it. And actually, I wish it would do some kind of a modern version of it. But basically, what it is, it's you're controlling like an army, and well, like a little small army, and if I recall right, you can switch between 3 different characters, or I don't know if you can switch on them on the fly, or if it's you control 3 different characters just as the story allows you to, one or the other. But you're kind of like your basic fighter, your tank, and then your more speed character, and you're walking along with your army behind you. And they kind of streamline the controls where you're walking along, and then you move you move a cursor, I believe, to where you want your army to go, and then eventually you'll fight like another army. And so then once you're actually in the fighting, it kind of plays like a hack and slash, but only you get all this chaos, right, where all the different your side and their side are fighting out, and it actually gets pretty intense. And so I originally played the Kingdom Under Fire Crusaders on the Xbox, and I always thought that back then it was one of the more impressively visually impressive games that I had seen, with just all the different characters on screen, because it gets really chaotic. And it's pretty fun. It has some RPG elements where you can power up your army, I believe, and then your character. And the other thing that stood out about it too for me is the rock soundtrack to it. I thought was pretty cool. So it has a cool story to it. I never beat the first one, but I always thought it was a pretty cool game. It's funny because about a year ago, I was just thinking about the game. I was like, what was the name of that Xbox game? I was like, that's right, Kingdom Under Fire Crusaders. And I was like, I don't think it's out anywhere. But I had a look, and ever since I got my Steam Deck, I have those like the PC storefronts now available, like Steam, GOG, and all that. And so I just had a look on Steam. I was like, I wonder if this game's on Steam now. And sure enough, it was on there. The Kingdom on Fire Crusaders, and then also Heroes, the one that I just selected right now. So I bought both of them because they were like for really cheap. I think like for $3. And so I was like, all right. So I snagged them both, and yeah, so I have it there on my Steam Deck, ready to play. But again, the Heroes one I haven't tried out, but maybe that'll be one that I'll try to try out this week and see what it's all about. See if it's anything like it's part 1 of it, or again, I believe it's part 1. But yeah, cool games. If you haven't checked them out, definitely give it a try. They're kind of strategy, but it's very simplified strategy. At least the Crusaders one is, and it's an interesting concept. And yeah, I think that if you like medieval combat, but again with a cool rock music and all, I think you'll appreciate this one. But that's really all I got on that one. So yeah, kind of excited to try that sequel. Or even if for some reason the sequel's no good, I might just play Crusaders again, because I do remember having fun with it. And from what I played a little bit of on the Steam Deck, at least Crusaders, it plays pretty well on there. Let's see. And so then next up is the Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. And this one I don't have a lot of experience with. I know I've played it a little bit just to check it out one time. I want to say that I think I even owned it at one point on cartridge. Just back then I was buying pretty much anything that had the Final Fantasy's name on it. I just never actually got around to playing it. And then at some point I'm pretty sure I sold it. But yeah, I mean, it seems cool. It's, with Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation 1, I have some experience with that. I played a few hours of that, and I like that. It seems cool. Just never got around to beating it. This one seems, at least in aesthetics, a bit more of a, I don't want to say childish. I mean, the character design looks a little bit more childish, but I think the game is still fairly complex and all, because it's a tactical game and all. I don't think they streamlined it too much. But either way, seems like a fun little strategy game. And I know I've heard some really good things about it, so definitely interested in giving that a shot finally. So yeah, but other than that, I don't have a whole lot to say on it. So hopefully next week I'll be able to provide more feedback on these games here as I give them a shot. And then there's Dark Souls. So I've already talked a bit about Dark Souls before, and this game I played this one a bit too. I played a couple hours into it, and I just have a hard time with these games for some reason. It's like my brain just can't figure out how to advance in these games. Like I get it. Like you want to save up your, what is it called, the will or whatever, right, to level up your characters at some point later, and kind of knowing that you're going to die though in it, so it almost seems it's almost like a roguelike in a sense, but I don't know. Like I said, I'll give it a shot again and see if I can get anywhere with it. I have this game on my PlayStation, downloaded on my PlayStation 5. So all these games I have access to. So I don't have an excuse to not at least try them out. So that's all I got really on these here. So hopefully I'll provide more information on them. So it'll be excited to, it's always kind of, and I think that's why I like doing this, because it's like, hey, it's like, yeah, that game does seem interesting or whatever, but I haven't really given it a shot. Let's give it a shot this week. So that's why I like doing this little thing that I'm doing here. Just kind of exposes me to more games. But yeah, that's all I got for that. And so as far as for modern gaming news, and I'll have a few things actually. So within this past week and a half or so, my daughter and I started playing that It Takes Two game. And I've always been interested in that game. I just never really had anybody to play doubles with. And so, but my daughter kind of got into it, and she's getting decent enough at platformers and all where she can, you can play with her. She just, her attention span gets a little short, and then she's all over the place, and then she starts being silly. But it's still kind of fun to play though. But then one day though, it was funny because I was at work, and then I come home, and then her and my wife are playing it. And so my wife was actually getting really into it. And so we've been wanting to play the game, but when my daughter's here, she always wants to play over. So then between the three of us, we just sort of pass the controller back and forth. And it's actually been a pretty fun game. We've gotten a little ways into it. And so far, yeah, we've been liking it. So I liked it so much because I downloaded I have one that I had gone on the PlayStation Plus membership. But I like that game so much that and now that I know that they're kind of into it, I ended up getting the Split Fiction, and so it seems to be of the same format, anyways. So curious to try that one out too, also. So yeah, so those games from, I think the company's called Hazelight. I can see the big appeal about them and why It Takes Two won Game of the Year. I don't know what else. I'd have to think about what else might have come out in 2021 that maybe should have gotten it also. But for what it is, though, I mean, I can see why it won Game of the Year. And, but yeah, fun little platformers. And also Donkey Kong Bonanza. I've been getting more through it. I've been playing it off and on here, so I'm still, I'm not too super far into it, I think. But that game is just very fun, and it's very addicting. And it's not hard. It's not a very difficult game. At least it hasn't been so far for me. But it is just very, like, almost, I don't know if I'm using the word correctly, but cathartic almost, to just go through the levels and bash everything and finding all these secrets, and you're constantly finding all this loot and all, like, the way you can, sort of slap your hands down on the ground and you collect all this gold and all. And it's just, and then, you find these bananas, and, and just like the animation to it and all, it just feels very rewarding, and it's just a very fun game to go through. And it's almost hard to describe how they still nail that sort of fun, addicting Nintendo quality that a lot of their games have, where you just want to keep coming back for more and more and more because it's visually stimulating. It's very fun and addicting, and the whole gameplay hook of just you smashing things, somehow they made it to a very fun thing, and it's I'm having a blast with it. I think Donkey Kong Banana is a very great game, but the only thing about it, again, it's not very difficult. And again, I'm not too much on like super challenging games, but I do want a bit of a challenge. But either way, though, it's been a great stress reliever game, because something about just the way you interact with the levels and all that, and bashing everything and all, and then all the gold little trinkets you get, it just makes it very addicting. But yeah, I'm really enjoying that game. And another game too, also, that I got into recently, that I got it on the Steam Deck and I beat it, admittedly on easy mode because the game is ridiculously hard, but not necessarily a bad thing though. But it's Eartheon, and I'd heard about this game a little while ago, and that it was being made for the Sega Genesis. Only it's being released first on Steam and then on the modern consoles, but then eventually they're going to put it on a Genesis cart that you can put on your Sega Genesis. Now, that necessarily right there, it's not unheard of. But what I don't know if it has ever happened before is that it's developed by developers from back when the Genesis was relevant. That is very cool. So Yuzo Koshiro, who he does the music to this, and he's also behind Revenge of Shinobi, Streets of Rage 2, and Beyond Oasis. So he's part of a company. I don't know if he's like the main head of the company or what, but it's a company called Ancient, and they were around back then. They were the team responsible for I believe the Streets of Rage. I think they were under the Ancient banner when they made Streets of Rage, and then also like the Beyond the Oasis game, and they did another game. I forgot the name of it. But yeah, it's basically developers from back then creating a game nowadays, specifically for the Sega Genesis. It's just that they're testing it out first on digital, right? So they can iron out all the bugs and all that. So that way they can put like a very polished final version on cart. But I played it the other day, and I was just in bed trying to get my daughter to sleep. And while in that process there, I ended up beating the game, but I beat it on easy because I mean it's still pretty challenging, and because if you played on normal, I was like I couldn't even get I barely got past the second stage, and I couldn't get farther than past that. But it's pretty fun. It's a cool shooter. It's definitely feels like a Sega Genesis game, and that's what I love about it. It's not the best shooter that I've ever played. Say, like, if I'm comparing it to the other lineup of Sega Genesis shooters, and admittedly, it's not the best Yuzo Koshiro soundtrack out there, but it's still very cool, though. And if you're into this in any kind of way, retro games, Sega Genesis games, supporting games that will come out on old systems and all that, especially developed by developers from back in the day, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's like $20 and all, and it's very fun. And I had a fun with it, the little bit that I played with it. And what's cool about it is that I beat it on easy, but then everything carries over to the next difficulty level because it has like, you can sort of power up your stats. Like you can get like more life bars and all to make things a little bit easier for you. And then that carries over to the next difficulty level to make it a bit easier. So it has that sort of addicting quality to keep you coming back for more. And so I thought that was pretty cool how they did that. So yeah, definitely check it out. But now on to 1981. Let's go back to 1981. I was 1 year old. The start of the 80s. And what a great decade the 80s was, I feel. Anyways. I don't know. I mean, speaking on pop culture, like, with as far as what was going on in the world and politics and all that, I only understand so much now from what I've studied, of it in school and, looking back at history and all. Otherwise, I didn't personally experience it, like as an adult. But as far as pop culture, for me, the 80s is one of the greatest decades ever. And it's just because so many things came out in this decade that was highly influential, that is still influencing things to this day. Like, we just got a new Alien show. The first Alien came out in the 70s, and then I believe Aliens came out in the 1980s sometime. And then so many things like, just a lot of cool things that we got in the 80s. And it started in this decade here, though. And as far as video games goes, so I did a little lookup on this here. So I'll just kind of be reading off of some notes that I took, and then also on Wikipedia here and Google. But basically, there was a lot of the arcade scene started kind of blowing up a bit more, and it was thanks a lot to Pac-Man, because Pac-Man was a big deal the year before, and so it was making a lot of money, and so a lot of developers were, hey, we want to kind of cash in on that, and so we started seeing a lot of great games during this time frame here. And one thing that was like a kind of solid game that was coming out a lot, that was making things really popular too in the arcades, was, like the high score space shooters. And so like we were getting things like Galaga. I think there was Galaxian that came out first, and Galaga was a sequel to it, I believe. But Galaga was the one that I really remember, right? That was pretty popular, and you still see it on a lot of arcade compilations nowadays and all. And it's a fun shooter where, again, a lot of these shooters, what they were is that you had your ship at the bottom and you're moving left and right, and you're shooting upwards towards the enemy that's coming down on you. So, for example, in Space Invader, it was like these pixelated alien looking things. And then in Galaga, it's like these bug looking things that you're in outer space. And that was the main thing. And then as the levels go on, they get progressively harder and faster and all. And again, the whole point is that you're, trying to rack up a high score on there. And so that, there was a lot of space shooters like that. And then, other things too, also like Centipede. I believe that came out in 1981 too, also according to this list as well too that I'm looking at. And so again, kind of the same concept, only now it's like a centipede thing coming down and you got to try to shoot it before it gets all the way down. So that was a very popular style of gameplay that you were seeing during this time frame. And these things were just making so much money. I mean, they were a big deal. They were really profitable. And Pac-Man, from what I'm seeing here, it ended up still being the highest grossing one for this year. And well, in the arcades, I think you were starting to see some versions of it come out for home systems, but I'll touch on that a little bit later, because Atari, which was the main popular home system, didn't get a version of it, I think, until a little bit later, because I don't see that it came out in 1981. But the arcade version, again, was just doing really excellent, and it was just basically paved the way for a lot of different games to come out. And then we were starting to see some innovation too, because again, it's, the cool thing about this time frame, and again, it's hard to replicate this, obviously, right? And there's only so many different directions you can go as far as creating a style of game. But because everything was so new back then, if somebody would come up with a new concept, and suddenly a new genre was born, so to speak. And so, for example, like we got Defender. So as I said before, a lot of the shooters that we were getting back then, you're a little spaceship at the bottom of the screen moving left and right, shooting upwards. But now we got this game that's a side-scrolling shooter. So you can go left and right on it. And so that was pretty innovative back then, because again, the screen is scrolling. And I know that seems very basic nowadays, but again, this is back in the days where, they're learning the technology, as the programmers are learning things, and then, they're, as they have new tools to work with, more experience and all that, it just started creating new genres. And so back then it was exciting. Now, again, I didn't live specifically during this time frame, but I still lived during a time where we were seeing new innovations, right, in gameplay designs and genres, and all being born, and all because of the new, just as the technology just became better. And so that was kind of cool. And I can imagine back then, that would have been, pretty awesome to see in the arcades. And so Defender was another huge hit back in the day. And there was, just a lot of fun arcade games like that and all. And then we also had Frogger. This game is fun. Excuse me. This game is pretty fun to play, where you're a frog and you're trying to cross some obstacles to get to the other side of the river or pond or whatever, to kind of like to your home. And like at first, usually starts off where you're trying to cross the street, and then you're trying to hop on these logs and all. And it's just a fun little addictive little game. But it was hugely popular as well back then. And then, we started seeing some competition for Atari a bit. So, because I think some systems had already come out, but I want to say, I think this is when Intellivision came out. And Intellivision, I believe, was backed by Activision, because Activision was a third party, right? And so they started publishing their games, I believe, on different systems. But Intellivision was more graphically better than the Atari VCS, again, later known as a 2600. And one of the things that made it stand out from what I researched was that some of their sports games were looking better on the Intellivision, right, than say on the Atari, where the Atari, everything was very basic. And same on the Intellivision, but at least now, for example, like, you're playing a baseball game, now you can actually see the diamond, right, on the field. And so it was, it was just the way they were trying to advertise it, like say, like, look, our system more powerful and all. But as we ended up learning later, right, that it's not always the power to your system that's going to make it financially successful. It's going to be also just what games are on there and just the way it's marketed and all that. So again, some systems were coming out that were a little bit more powerful than, say, the Atari 2600, but they just, it just couldn't take away the sales from Atari. I'm not seeing any much sales figures here on some of those other systems. Maybe if I go somewhere else and I can try to pull up like how well some of these. Oh, actually, no, I think I see some things here. So actually the Intellivision didn't do too bad. So going down here a little bit then, so I'll just kind of go over here like some of the, starting with the highest grossing arcade games. So in Japan, this is where it was really popular, getting popular too as well, so starting with number 1 is Donkey Kong from Nintendo. So I'll get into that here a bit. And then after that, number 2 was Jamputer. And then number 3 was Pro Golf. Number 4 was Pac-Man. And again, so Pac-Man originally was developed by Namco. Because sometimes there's a misconception that Atari was the one that developed the game. Namco was the original developer for it. But then Quix at number 5. And then Galaga at number 6. And then Bosconian at number 7. Crazy Climber at number 8. Crush Roller at number 9. And Grand Champion at number 10. And then in the United States, it only says for number 1, Pac-Man, which was at $1 billion in revenue. And then number 2, Defender, doesn't give any figures on that. And then number 3, Asteroids. So it seems like Atari might have had a more popular arcade scene back then, or it's more I should say, more options anyways. At least from what I'm seeing here. Let's see. But then as far as for the best-selling home video games, so number 1 was Space Invaders. And all of these games I'm going to list here, it lists 5 of them. All of them were on the Atari VCS. So Space Invaders was number 1. It says here for sales for, let's see, 2,964,137. I don't know if that's copies or money. It doesn't say. But then number 2 was Warlords. And that was at 936,861. Number 3 was Breakout with 838,635. Number 4 was Night Driver with 779,547. And then number 5, it just shows here tied between Asteroids and Football. It only gives the figures for Asteroids, which was at 407,000 and 90,000. Or I'm sorry, 90,000, yeah. Excuse me. And then for the best-selling home systems, so we had the Game & Watch, which shows here sales figures of 400 million plus. And number 2, the Atari VCS at 3,600,000. And then the Intellivision, which shows here at 1 million. So it looks like it did decently then. I mean, for back then anyways. And then it says here the Atari 400/800, some kind of a computer, so at 300,000. And then the ZX81 was 250,000. And then the TRS-80 at 250,000. The Apple II at 210,000. The PET from Commodore at 40,000. And then the IBM at 35,000. And those last several ones were computers also. So yeah, Intellivision, I guess it did okay then. I was always, because I remember there was a ColecoVision, and I had the Magnavox Odyssey too, and which I believe had already come out by this time, but apparently it's not even on this list. So I guess I don't know. I don't think that one did too well. But I remember the ColecoVision also, and the Intellivision. And Intellivision is the one that seems to kind of stood out a little bit more amongst a lot of those consoles that were coming out back then, because. So I'm going to talk about, obviously, later about the video game crash that happened here in a couple of years. But before that, though, in the 70s, from what I understand, there was a bit of a video game crash also that happened. And what that was I think it was just too many consoles were out there. Like there was just, everyone was trying to make some kind of a console of some sort. And so the industry crashed to an extent. I don't know the full story behind that. And so it's something I would need to do a little bit of research on, but something that I did come across, so that there was a bit of a video game crash that happened sometime in the late 70s, but it had to do more with the consoles themselves. But still, though, that's, so the video game industry is starting to grow in the home market. And those were some of the big players from back then. So this year is also where, you start seeing some things from Nintendo on this here. But before I get into that, actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I mentioned before about arcade ports for Pac-Man. So one thing I came across is, so I had the Odyssey, the Magnavox Odyssey 2. That was my second generation system. That's what I knew back then. And so we had a little game on there called Casey Munchkin. You're like this fuzzy little creature, and you go around the maze trying to get away from these kind of ghost looking creatures. And you're trying to collect these dots around the maze. Sound familiar? Right? To Pac-Man. So apparently from what I researched is that this ended up going to core. And so, I guess Atari, or see, and this is where I'm not 100% sure, because I know Namco was the original developers of Pac-Man, but somehow Atari had already gotten the licensing rights to some extent. But I think it was Atari that took them to core, because Atari hadn't had, so they haven't had their home version of Pac-Man come out. And so here's a game that looks very similar to Pac-Man. And apparently that was a big no-no, because, with this industry here, and I think with a lot of things too, also because like, with whether if it's movies and all that and all, they weren't quite as widespread and so many different things nowadays as there is now, and music and all that. So copyright laws and all were starting to be challenged in a lot of different ways, right, for the first time. And so here's, for example, in the video game industry. And so this game was a little too close, right, to being what Pac-Man was, that it went to the Supreme Court and Atari won I believe Atari won this case. So it kind of goes, because back then there was a lot of clones. There was a lot of them, right? Like, for example, like the space shooters, Galaga, Space Invaders, Centipede, and all. They all kind of follow a similar format. So I think so this case was, I guess you can say, for better or worse, important to the video game industry, because saying like, hey, you can't copy pretty much exactly what we have. And so from what I researched, it looks like Casey Munchkin got pulled off the shelves. So, which was interesting, because the one that I was always remember playing was Casey's Crazy Chase. And so what that was, they kind of changed the formula a bit. So you're still in a maze, you're still playing the same little fuzzy little creature, only now you're chasing a Pac-Man looking character that has these energy balls behind it. And so you're chasing it, as opposed to you getting chased by these, well, there's still like these enemies on the maze where they're not necessarily like ghost looking. They look a little bit different, though they're still kind of around, but you're the one doing the chasing now, so to speak. So, and which actually was a really fun game. So, and for me, I almost like it better than Pac-Man, but again, basically the point is that, that was just kind of starting to become a no-no, where, you can't copy other people's work. So it was important for them in that sense there anyways. But yeah, so then, the other popular game here, as, we started talking about a little bit earlier, is Donkey Kong. And so Nintendo's starting to make a name for themselves here in the arcade scene. And so Donkey Kong, basically what it is, it's, if you don't know the character already, but this is the origins of it, is where you're this big gorilla up on this ledge high up, and you're throwing barrels or stuff down at the character that you control, which is Jumpman. And so as Jumpman, you're trying to get to the top to rescue a princess up there. But that princess is her name was Pauline. So it's not Princess Peach, like, a lot of people think. It was Pauline. And then Jumpman, it was what would later become known as Mario. So basically the way Mario got his name, and I just found this out here as I was doing some research on this. So, because I knew that the name Mario was from some kind of a landlord that Nintendo had. I wasn't quite sure the details, but this is what I'm researched here on this, is that the original name of the actual live human that he got his name from was Mario Segale, I believe is how you pronounce it. And so he was a landlord of Nintendo of America's warehouse in the early 1980s. So apparently Nintendo at one point was struggling to pay their rent. So Mario Segale, so he was a guy who had a mustache that resembled Jumpman from the Donkey Kong game. He gave him an extension on their rent. So in gratitude of that, they decided to name the character Jumpman after him, after Mario. So that's like, it looks like that's apparently where that came about. And so I didn't know that I guess they were behind on their rent and all. So that's kind of cool. And so it looks like, sadly, so Mario Segale, looks like he passed away in 2018. But looks like that's how he got his name. So that's where it all started. And so Pauline has been becoming, because it was always assumed that it was Princess Peach, right? But it's not. And then after that, the character just kind of got forgotten. But more recently, she's been getting into the spotlight because she, more recent games like the Donkey Kong Bonanza game that I'm playing here, she's basically like your sidekick in it. So it's kind of cool how they're, going back to the roots on that. But yeah, I thought that was interesting though, on how they ended up getting their name. But yeah, so what ended up happening? So how did Donkey Kong get its name though? So basically what it was is that, and again, this is just kind of one of the things between the differences in cultures, right, from the United States and Japan. But from what I researched, they were looking for a name for the gorilla, that had, because Kong, I would assume from King Kong, right? And, but they were thinking about something that's like, what is, he's a stubborn ape, right? So what is something that is stubborn? And so they were researching it, like, here, for a name here for in the English vocabulary. And so then, oh, well, a donkey is stubborn. So I think that they saw like a donkey is stubborn. Maybe that's also maybe not so much the name of the animal, but just like a term for it. Like, donkeys are stubborn too. So hence they decided to name it Donkey Kong. So basically almost like saying stubborn Kong, or, to that effect. But right, they just assumed that maybe that's just another word for stubborn, which it kind of is, right? So anyways, again, just one of those almost like fun little references as far as like the differences in culture, how things can get kind of mistranslated, but then it just sort of it's a catchy to the ear. And so then you just go with it. So Donkey Kong. But because, again, lawsuits and everything, right, and all where you're starting to step on other properties, King Kong, there was an obvious resemblance to it. And so what I understand with it, Universal, I think, my understanding of it basically is that I think it was Universal Studios that ultimately kept saying that, you can't use Donkey Kong. Yeah, it was Universal City Studios versus Nintendo. So basically, you can't use Donkey Kong, right? Because we have our character, King Kong. So what ended up happening, though, is that apparently the name had been, that I guess it was already public domain, where ultimately they didn't have the rights to it, to the name King Kong anymore. Like they didn't renew their license or something to that effect, that ultimately they didn't have the rights to it. And they went into the lawsuit assuming that they did. So ultimately Nintendo ended up winning. And because Nintendo won on this, so it kind of started, I guess, emphasizing, right, and all that if you want to maintain your property, you have to renew these licenses, right? So they don't become public domain. One of the attorneys that helped them win on this, his name was Kirby, or he had the name Kirby somehow. And it kind of like the way what they did with Mario, in a way to sort of honor him and all, they did a little something with a character that, that had his name on there, which, that'll come into later years. But I'm sure if you know anything about video games, anything about Nintendo, you probably already know what that is. But I thought that was kind of cool how they were, giving respect and, and honoring some of the people that helped make them big, in the years to come. So that was kind of cool. And also this year, 1981, we started seeing the seeds being planted in what would later become big RPG games. And so this year we saw Ultima from Richard Garriott and Wizardry from Andrew Greenberg and Robert Woodhead. I've never played these games. I remember Ultima, there was a whole lot of them. And back in those early days, when I started getting into RPGs and I started hearing about Ultima, which again, it was still a very niche thing, but it was like the popular name, I guess. It was starting to come out in RPGs outside of something like Dungeons and Dragons. They were very basic and all, but it started laying down the foundation of your exploring an overmap world, experience points and hit points and things like that, right? It started introducing all that there. And for people that had PCs, they were experiencing these RPGs, in that very early sense, because like console RPGs didn't really start becoming a thing until later on. We had The only thing that I can think of that was kind of close and it was coming around this time. I think it came out last year. I think I talked about it. I don't recall, but was Adventure on the Atari. Because again, there wasn't really anything else out there. Because again, for consoles, it wasn't until later. But for PC gamers, this is where it started taking shape. And games like this, like Ultima, Wizardry, and then also with like the tabletop Dungeons and Dragons games, right? It started laying down the foundation of what would later become the RPGs that we know nowadays. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting how they were starting to do this thing here. But yeah, so some interesting things that started happening here in 1981. And so just to kind of go back a bit, I don't know, I don't quite recall if I did it on the last podcast, but I'll start naming here what my personal favorite game of the year was, from back then. So for 1980, I would say Pac-Man. I mean, it's still a fun game. It's I can definitely have some fun with it. And for this year, so just some games that came out. So just kind of going over some of the ones that I might have not already mentioned, but so there was. Let's see, Crazy Kong, which my understanding was a sort of a ripoff of Donkey Kong, and that was another one where it was like a big no-no. So it's funny how Donkey Kong was getting sued by King Kong, but then they lost, but then Donkey Kong beat Crazy Kong, so kind of funny. But then there was a Castle Wolfenstein had like a version. I think it was like a top-down shooter, very basic, and then there was. Let's see, Tempest. Oh, that came out in 1981. Okay. And then Centipede, I already said that. Turbo, a game from Sega, which was actually pretty revolutionary at the time with its sort of 3D kind of like graphics that it had. So, yeah, I mean, Sega, this is where they started becoming relevant in the video game space eventually because of their more higher technology that they had in their arcade games. But let's see, Stargate, which has nothing to do with the Kurt Russell movie, New Rally X, Zork 2, which I think was some kind of an adventure game. Let's see, and there's a whole bunch, obviously, right? I'm just trying to go over the ones that I'm somewhat familiar with. It was Kaboom, and Treasure Island. But yeah, so a lot of different, again, like very arcadey games. And the one that I would probably pick for my game of the year personally, my first thought was Donkey Kong, because I mean, I've played it, it's fun. I've actually been playing it a little bit recently since Donkey Kong Bonanza came out, just to kind of go back to the roots, and it's fun. It's very challenging though, but it is fun though. But now that I know that Tempest came out in 1981, this is a tough one. I'm going to go with Tempest because it is a fun game. And I remember being really impressed with the graphics on there and how like the wireframe of the mazes and all sort of zooms out and in. I thought that was a really cool effect. And in the arcade, you had like this knob that you would twist, because basically you're sort of like the spaceship that goes around this kind of like a grid. And then now the grid changes shapes, where sometimes it's just like a circle, sometimes it's like a cross and all that. But you would turn the knob and your ship would rotate around this grid. And if I remember right, whenever you would turn the knob, it kind of like gave like it had like these notches on it, right? That it would kind of like click a little bit as you turn around. So it gave it almost like the haptics feedbacks that we have nowadays. So I thought that was always kind of a cool effect, and it was pretty challenging too and all. But yeah, it's a fun game, again, for one of those games that you're just trying to get like a high score on and all that. But yeah, I would say probably Tempest would be my game. But yeah, so a lot of innovation that happened this year, and again, we're starting to see the seeds being planted of what would eventually come later. So kind of cool to see where a lot of this stuff comes from. But yeah, that's what I got for 1981. And so next week we'll be doing 1982, and I got some games to check out too, so that'll be fun. So I'm gonna come back with some more feedback on what I experienced of these games. But yeah, so hopefully you have an amazing weekend, and until the next.